Hey, how's it going, friends? Josh Zaring here again. Today I'm going to show you all my settings step by step on the back of the GoPro, real big on the screen so you can actually see what I'm doing. And these are the settings you would use for the most raw and flat image possible for color grading and editing for the best end result. Whether or not you're really into color grading or editing, this is a great place to start because you get the cleanest footage from the GoPro. And even on their website, some of the settings are the same as what I'm about to show you. So let's get started. Step 1 to enable all these following settings is swiping from right to left on your GoPro screen to enable Protune. The first setting we're going to change is the color profile, and I use flat so I can color grade and really get the colors and contrast that I want. But if you like the default GoPro colors and you're not going to do a whole lot of adjusting, you can leave this setting at the GoPro color. The second setting we're going to change is the white balance, and that's really important because from shot to shot when you're editing, your white balance, if it's set to auto, will automatically change. A real pain to put shots together. From clip to clip, it's going to change and the color will also shift because of it. So you want to go ahead just like any other camera, and if it's daylight, if it's sunny outside, select the daylight, which is 5500K. If it's cooler, go with one of the cooler temperatures. If it's in the shade, go with 6 to 7K. And you can sort of preview this on the back of your GoPro, and you can also use the app to see it a little bit better. You can leave the camera on, change the white balance, and test it to make sure it looks right. If it's too yellow or too blue, it's not accurate. Just as a personal side note, for my own preferences for the white balance on the GoPro, I leave it on native most of the time because it seems to yield a slightly better dynamic range, a more raw image, and I like that so I can just adjust the white balance myself afterwards. The third setting is ISO, and I always leave that at 400 for the least noise. If I have to set it to 800, then there isn't enough light and I shouldn't be using a GoPro in the first place. So go ahead and set that to 400 and the max ISO will stay at 400. The fourth setting we're going to change is the shutter speed. And just a disclaimer, if you don't mind it automatically adjusting, and which it does a really good job of, and you don't mind slightly too digital looking footage, then you can skip this step. However, if you want better looking footage, you can follow what is known as the 180-degree shutter rule, which dictates doubling your frame rate. So if you have 24, you would go to 50 or 60. If you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you would select 120. If you're shooting at 120 frames per second, you would select 240 and so on. It's an easy multiplication by 2. The fifth setting we're going to change is the sharpness. I leave it on low at all times, and I usually don't sharpen it too much at all. For editing purposes, you want as clean a file as possible, and the higher sharpening settings really kind of ruin the file. And if you really need to, sharpening in post looks better in the end. The sixth setting we're going to change is the raw audio track. And the raw audio track allows you to have an uncompressed audio track. And we're going to leave the processing for this at low, so there's minimal processing and you get a cleaner file and you can process it yourself later. So if you're using the GoPro audio, whether it's the built-in mics or the mic adapter with an actual microphone, this is a good setting to stay at. If you happen to be using the built-in microphones, a good rule of thumb is if you're outside, have it on wind only. If you're inside, it's mostly safe to keep it on stereo. The seventh setting we're going to change is the video stabilization. And the stabilization does a fairly decent job if you don't have a gimbal, and if you combine that with a very steady hand and direct and deliberate movements with the GoPro. Basically, if you're not using a stabilizer or gimbal of any sort, or if it's not tripod mounted, it's a good idea to leave the digital stabilization on. The last step is partially my personal preference and partially probably one of the hugest steps in making the GoPro footage not look like GoPro footage and having it not be so obvious that it's GoPro footage. And that is setting the resolution at 2.7K, whether I'm shooting at 60 frames per second or 24 frames per second. And then I enable linear mode, which straightens everything out really well. And just for anyone that wonders, it switches the focal length, the actual 35mm focal length, to very close to 24mm. So really, it's still a very wide field of view, but it's much more believable because there's no curved edges and it's much easier to mix with footage from other cameras. To give a really good example of the difference between the regular fisheye look and the linear mode, here's a still from a video of me standing in front of a house, and I made sure it was in front of something with plenty of lines that are supposed to be straight, and you can see everything's really curved, and I look fairly normal because I'm in the center of the frame. If I was off to the side, my features would be extremely exaggerated. Now in this still, I turned linear mode on, and you can see everything's basically ruler straight, and everything looks really normal as it would from any other camera. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Please subscribe and tell your friends. And remember, create, share, repeat, and keep it awesome. See you next time.